What's up, Sterile Processing Universe? It's Hank Balch here from Beyond Clean. You're watching Workers or Widgets, a symposium on sterile processing, robotics, and automation. And our guest for this session is Braun Kiess. He comes from us from the East Coast. Well, actually, I don't know where you come from, Braun, but you're on the East Coast.
East Coast. Yep. Born
Okay.
and raised. Born and
Okay.
raised.
Great. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're involved in all this conversation of robotics and automation in our industry.
Yeah, sure. No, and thanks. Thanks for hosting this, Hank. I think it's a really interesting topic. Given the current environment we're in. So I am a partner and a co-founder of a company called RST Automation, and we make automation systems for sterile processing departments. So we're very much involved in this space. We've been at this for a while, and have seen a lot of change in the industry, and I think that's only going to be increasing. And so basically, I handle sort of all things sales and finance related for RST. And we are based on the East Coast, based in the Bronx in New York City. Servicing all the U.S. right now, and some ambitions or inquiries from abroad too. So starting to expand our footprint a little.
Beautiful. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think before we hopped on, we've got a lot of international guests in the symposium as well, because these, especially these solutions, I think all of the conversation around sterile processing is really a global conversation. Some of the standards obviously differ from country to country, but when you're talking about scaling solutions like this, they, to my opinion, like they would tend to scale a little easier than maybe some of the more targeted products, like chemical indicators. For instance, is difficult to have one that solves all the problems around the globe. But do you disagree with that?
Well, it's these are complex problems and complex spaces in sterile processing, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that in depth. But there's a lot going on, right, and a lot of complex processes and a lot of variation. And so whenever you're dealing with complex processes and variation, you have real challenges with automation. However, those processes also tend to be some of the most rewarding or most beneficial if you are able to help automate them. So it's it's complex.
So you made an offhand comment a little bit earlier that you've been in the sterile processing space in terms of automation for a while, I think is the phrase you used. And
Yeah.
In the timeline of automation, I think you're probably going to be the innovative team that has been in the space the longest in the entire symposium. Can you talk about kind of what the impetus for the launch of your company was, and what really drove that decision to focus of all places in sterile processing?
Yeah, sure. And geez, I remember the first day I went into a sterile processing department, and I was honestly really, I never really knew that department existed, to be honest with you, prior to getting involved here with RST. And then, of course, when we were first setting out to develop our technologies, we obviously started spending a lot of time in the departments and talking with people and observing the processes that were in place. And it just really amazed me, kind of the level of or the lack, I should say, of automation, right? You had really fundamentally a process, a lot of processes in sterile processing that haven't really changed in probably 100 years, right? So, I mean, a tray of surgical instruments, for example, is assembled, to a large extent the same way it is today as it was 100 years ago, right? With a person and a table. And combining that with kind of the observation that this was really, really a manufacturing center. Right, so sterile processing really, we believe, is a manufacturing center within the hospital, in the sense that they really make the same sort of product day in and day out, which is trays of primarily trays of sterile surgical instruments, right? And so, but that the business mindset was never for a long time, for better or for worse, applied to healthcare, right, to hospitals. And I think in the last decade or two, we've seen a lot of change. I'd say really in the last decade, we've seen a lot of change in that mentality, right? And again, for better or worse, a lot more a lot more of a business mentality being applied to hospitals and to healthcare. And with that, we've seen the recognition, by some of the thought leaders in this industry. I think that this really is a manufacturing process, and because of that, it's open to all the sort of automation tools that are used in large scale commercial processes such as car manufacturing. So our sort of take on it was that ultimately we think this, the sterile processing department will involve the same automation you see, perhaps in a modern, car manufacturing facility. But we're obviously, kind of a long way from that right now. But I think it'll get there as the mindsets change and the mentalities change, and of course the technologies evolve and improve. But so really, what we saw, where we saw the opportunity for RST to come in and sort of help is to take these processes that were very antiquated and modernize them, right, and adapt sort of some technologies that are used in other industries, right, to this industry, and at the same time improve quality and allow people to have more meaningful jobs and more meaningful work, and of course efficiency ends up being in there somewhere. But I think interestingly enough, and this is something we can dive into later too, but it's productivity isn't always is rarely actually the first outcome of automation. It sort of ends up being a byproduct later on. And really what and this is one of the things we saw in developing our tray assembly system, is that it was all about really quality, right, and the defects that were coming. Tray assembly is one of these complex tasks, and especially when you're talking about trays that have maybe 150 instruments in them, right? So it's a complex task, and because of that, it's because we're human. Humans have, and there's been a lot of studies done on this. Humans have very high error rates, right, when it comes to complex tasks.
Right.
In fact, as there's a direct correlation between the increase in complexity in the task and the error rate, right, associated with the task when you have a human performing it. And so tray assembly is a very, it's a complex task, especially big trays. And so because of that, you have, very high error rates in these trays, and it's nobody's fault. It's just, it's just we're human, and that's, that's, what we are. And so we saw a real, I think, opportunity first and foremost to just improve quality, right? And especially when you're dealing in healthcare, and I think it's one of the really rewarding things of being in healthcare is that you have the ability to affect patient outcomes and affect patient care quality and all those things. So so having complete and accurate trays in the operating room when a surgeon's doing something important is is meaningful. And so we saw really, I think, initially an opportunity to that was primarily quality driven. And then and with that quality, the quality really comes from creating consistency in the process, right? For sort of standardizing the process. And once you're able to get a consistent, and usually initially, actually ultimately you'll see a decrease sort of in quality. A decrease in productivity as you sort of implement the consistency. A lot of times there's a drop in productivity because you're probably shifting the process a little, changing it a little.
I mean, you're taking out the shortcuts.
Yeah, exactly. You're eliminating all the shortcuts, and you're kind of fixing all the errors and sort of the mess that was there,
Right.
which is one of the big challenges too in our implementation is sort of cleaning up what's become sort of the status quo. And that can be a painful process, at a lot of at a lot of facilities, and it takes time and it takes effort. But once you're able to ultimately then get that correct process, that consistent process, right, the technology and the automation helps ensure or maintain that quality level, and then you can start to go for the productivity, right? And that allows you to then start sort of tweaking it and focusing on, okay, now we've got the quality, now we've got the consistency, now how do we make this faster and better? But that's that's down the road, right? So, and I think that's one of the maybe common misconceptions about automation is that that it's all about productivity. It's not. It's really the productivity actually I think is secondary and comes later. It's really a lot of times first and foremost about process quality, and consistency.
Are you hearing that misconception around productivity from potential customers in the space, like asking you for solutions to increase their productivity? Or is that a response kind of when they find out about automation to say, oh yeah, well, you're just wanting to make us faster?
Right. Yeah, it's what customers want is they need the return on investment, right?
Mhm.
So they have to justify the expense involved in the technology and in the automation, which makes sense, right? And the trouble you run into is that so that's where the productivity becomes first and foremost. Is that that's usually what's driving the ROI, the return on investment models, right? Um, and the reason why is because it's so difficult to put a price on quality,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I mean, it's. I think we can all sit down and as rational people agree that there is real advantages to having consistent and accurate trays, in that operating room, and avoiding operating room delays and upset patients, upset surgeons, and potentially issues with patient outcomes and things. So quality is a very important thing at a hospital. But the trouble is when you try to put a number around that, what's an accurate and complete tray worth to you
Right.
as a facility? Well, who knows? It's a very hard thing to put a dollar sign around. So because of that, we sort of get forced on the business side of the equation into the productivity game,
Mhm.
and that ends up
That's where
being
you can actually measure
that's where we can
the
measure
impact.
and show the return on investment
Right.
with the productivity. But it takes time to get there, and it's not a oftentimes pleasant experience. The journey, although we've been working hard to sort of to help with that. So the implementation. Becomes a big part, and to be honest with you, Hank, we find ourselves really not so much in the technology. When it comes down to it, we're not so much really in the technology business as we are maybe in the change management business.
Mm-hmm.
And going in there and changing a process, especially in kind of a paradigm shifting way, is not an easy thing to do, right? People don't, as humans, we sort of are just adverse to change. We just like, most humans like the status quo. They like the way they've been
Right.
doing things. Um, and they've also come to have certain shortcuts or accepted norms in their processes that shouldn't be there, and they don't like kind of getting rid of those. It's kind of painful to all of a sudden start doing something different in the right way, and so there's a lot of a big aspect of, I think, technology and automation when it comes to the actual implementation of it is dealing with this change management and dealing with managing the perceptions of the staff um, and kind of really hand holding throughout the process, which is what we find ourselves doing a lot of.
Hmm. Yeah, you brought up a couple of my soapboxes here. One of which is the unit of service conversation is kind of baked in to that productivity misconception that you mentioned, and it's this assumption that we're operating on in sterile processing that to measure our our output as a department, the one indicator that you need is how many instruments are coming through and how fast.
Right.
But you brought out that's actually not an accurate measurement of the purpose of the mission of sterile processing is to produce quality sterile instrumentation. Because if you're not doing that, you're causing harm, you're causing delays, you're causing more productivity issues on the back end than we're even on the front end. And yet, none of our current industry quality benchmarks or metrics include any quality component. Everything is on how many trays processed, how many loads sterilized, how many instruments reprocessed. Um, I don't know, about 12 months, maybe 18 months ago, I wrote an article about uh, labeling a new benchmark in the industry called usable units of service.
Mm.
So, how many are we producing that are actually at that standard of quality that can be used? But otherwise, it would be like the Ford production plant uh, counting every car that came off of the lot, but only a like certain percentage of them were actually drivable.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
true
Some have
productivity.
three tires, not four, and
Exactly.
you know
So, what are we doing
that's
here?
not yeah, it's not really a unit of production, right? If it's missing the front axle. So
Right, right. So yeah, that piece definitely hits home with me, the balance between those two. And then that brings up another point that's kind of tied to productivity and the link between quality and this is the speed versus quality challenge that we have in sterile processing. And in the industry from the very first day that you become a sterile processing technician. It's kind of beat into your head that quality is paramount.
Hmm.
You go as slow as it takes you to process to get it right, and then uh, if you need to, you can go faster. But if you go fast at the expense of quality, then obviously that's a mistake. Um, However, there's another kind of input to that discussion that I brought up in another article that uh, in healthcare and in sterile processing in particular, we have surgical cases on the schedule tomorrow that require clean, sterile, functional instrumentation to be ready. Uh, so there's a pull mechanism, from us that means we can't go slow.
Hmm.
We have to find a way to marry speed and quality because we've got a number of patients on the schedule that require these devices, and so um, how to get there and that priority of finding ways to standardize the process, even if it's a long-term standardization, to your point, to ensure that we've got measurable quality but attainable speed to say this is how fast we can go safely,
Hmm.
not how slow we can go safely. And both of
Yeah.
those, in my opinion, have to be tied together.
No, I agree 100%, and I think that's something that's really interesting with our technologies is kind of the data side of it that we're able to get, and the metrics we're able to kind of put around that, and so we when we talk about our tray assembly product, we get really accurate and really granular tray assembly times, right? Because the machine is tracking, not only how much time it is to assemble the tray, but actually how long it takes to process every instrument in that tray. And so what's interesting is there's sort of two conversations you can have around those times. One is, obviously if it's taking a really long time, right? We sort of set a benchmark of about 10 seconds an instrument, which includes good, a comfortable pace and sort of, a fair amount of time for quality, inspection and testing of the instrument,
Right.
right? So if you see technicians taking a lot longer than 10 seconds, on an instrument, you can have a conversation on that side. But I think the more interesting conversation is if you see technicians that are going a lot faster than 10 seconds an instrument, because
Mm-hmm.
what that tells you is they're not taking the time to inspect and test the instrument, as they should, and so there's probably, right, there's quality issues associated with that. So I think that's another aspect of automation that is interesting, or that of technology that's interesting, is the sort of data, and the insights, the data that sort of never before was really available,
Right.
both with respect to quality and productivity, and the insights that data can give you. And I'll give you another example, right? So we actually, one of the other things we track is if a technician has to quit a tray, right? Why did they have to quit the assembly of the tray? Could they not find the instrument, all the instrumentation that was needed, or was there dirty instruments in the tray? And so we've actually had one facility that went and ended up changing sort of some of their processes in the decontam, because of the effect, the downstream effect that it was causing once they were able to get this data on why there were
Right.
so many trays that were being stopped, right? They had to be reprocessed, so back through decontam. So I think that, yeah, and you really start to see how the whole workflow, right, is connected, and how quality sort of has to be from one end of the process to the other. But I think it's a great sort of side effect of the technology is the data and the insight it gives us into not only productivity but into the quality side too.
So I don't know what y'all call that data point, but like the phrase kind of like the safety window comes to mind of
Oh yeah,
if
that's
you're going faster than
yeah,
this safety window, then whatever's happening is not compliant.
right,
Whatever shortcuts there are, we don't
right.
necessarily know what that is, but if
Mhm.
you're doing this tray quicker than 5.5 minutes, then something's wrong. Something's not getting expected. Yeah.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And that's it's a good thing to know. We actually had another interesting case where, and I think it just speaks to kind of how things haven't changed in so long in sterile processing, is that we find a lot of, when it comes to quality, we find that a lot of ORs, a lot of surgeons have just kind of come to accept the product that comes out of sterile processing, because a lot of them who have been there a long time have tried to change it for so long, and haven't gotten any results, that they basically give up, and they just sort
Right.
of accept that, hey, this is the way that they make our trays, and it's we just got to learn to work with it, because there's nothing we can really do to change it, because I've tried for the last 2 decades, and nothing
Right.
ever happens, or the last decade. And so we actually, in one of the facilities we did an implementation at recently, we actually ended up, the sterile processing manager ended up with a surgeon coming down, actually found the SPD,
Mm.
uh, and came in and said, said what did you change? Right?
Mm.
What are you doing different? Because all of a sudden his trays, were accurate and complete, and and he said, this is just, I haven't, what changed? And so they, the manager brought him over to the, to our AIM tray assembly system, and said, well, we just started assembling these trays on this. And he got so excited about it, he actually went up and he got other surgeons, and he brought them down, and he was showing them the system and stuff. And it was,
Beautiful.
no, it was great. But it's, unfortunately, I think because there's been so little change in sterile processing, that the customer, which is kind of really the operating room, right, has just become, has come to accept that, hey, we just have to deal with these trays the way they are. And now that they're seeing, hope for improvement, and that there's some excitement, I think, around that. So
Yeah, that data part that you mentioned too about identifying the trays that were quit um, in the middle, just the measure of waste. Like, it made me kind of think about, yeah, like how many hours a week in a large facility are completely wasted because someone started a tray and did not finish it, which means someone else is going to have to come back and do the exact same work of inspection all the way up to whatever point it was that tray was quit, and then complete it from there. You've got all of that rework,
yeah,
and today, in many scenarios, that's not being measured at all, uh,
mhm,
because of that kind of traditional model of just assembling it and then whatever happened. Even if it's like you're starting trays that you couldn't finish before the end of your shift, like that's a common scenario.
mhm,
Um, if a system could tell you, ah, beep, yeah, don't start that tray because you're not going to be able to finish it before your shift ends.
right.
Like, there's a infinite amount of things you could do with that kind of data. So I find that
Yeah.
very interesting.
Well, just a side note on that. So one of the interesting things about our system is that technically you could stop. One technician could stop assembling a tray mid tray, walk away from it, and the other technician could walk up and pick up right where
Mm,
that technician left off.
mm.
And because the machine, the system is keeping track of what's been processed and what hasn't, and and knows at any given point in time, knows exactly, right, there's a button that they can actually press that says, hey, here's the instruments that are needed to complete this tray. And
So
they can hit that button whenever they want. They can actually print that as a little list if they want.
you're
Um,
really getting into some disruptive cultural impact there.
yeah,
Because of the status quo of us putting our names on that tray. I
yeah,
mean, there's like, I've almost seen like fist fights, with people's like, no, do not put my name on that
that
tray
tray.
if I'm not the one that did it all, or
Right,
vice versa,
right.
but you're getting at something like, um, all over the place in other industries, there's collaborative work that's being done
Mhm.
in completing uh, a full like device or assembly, right? Like we were talking about the automotive piece, and
Right.
uh, I told this story in a different session, but I took my sterile processing team to the Ford plant down in San Antonio that made the Ford Tacoma, and we saw. I mean, not the Ford Tacoma, the Toyota plant that made the
Okay.
Toyota Tacoma. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. There you go.
Um, and so, anyways, we saw all those pieces being assembled, but it's not one person that's putting together the whole vehicle. It's all these different people who have to trust the process,
Right.
and having that ability, technology, and sterile processing to trust the process, even on something as intimate as tray assembly. I can definitely see that as a cultural barrier, but not necessarily based in anything besides just this is how we've always done it. So we're not comfortable doing it differently.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So one of the things we've thought about, we haven't sort of explored the use case yet, but would love to. Is a team. Is kind of a team approach to tray assembly, and our technology sort of facilitates that. And it's again, it's such a kind of a paradigm shift that it we haven't found a customer who sort of wants to embark on that journey yet with us, but it's something we'd really be interested to to explore, because like you said, it's when it comes to and again, assembling a car is a fairly complex task, but it's not one person, right? It's a team of people that are all that are utilizing technology to do it as as consistently and as efficiently as possible, while at the same time working as a team and doing kind of meaningful work. So yeah, I think it'd be neat to explore.
Yeah. You've made some allusions to some of the technologies and solutions that you're involved with in the market. Can you give us some kind of specific insight on what these things do that that you're supporting in the industry today? Like, what are the different variations that you've got on the market?
Yeah, sure. So all of our systems to date basically kind of all utilize our core technology, which is really a combination of machine vision and artificial intelligence and AI. And basically by combining those two, what we get is kind of the fundamentally is the ability to optically recognize the surgical instruments. So without any marking, right? So we don't need to barcode them or RFID them or anything. So basically, what our systems do is they all of them sort of fundamentally are able to sort of take some pictures and again using some algorithms and AI and stuff, able to figure out basically what the instrument is. Then of course, once you're able to identify an instrument, then you can kind of do whatever you want with it. You can count it and sort it or package it or do whatever the process may entail. But fundamentally, that's kind of the core technology that our company is built on, and then we have some different embodiments of that technology. And one area, like we said, when we came into this department, where did we see kind of the biggest opportunity? And it was really looking at those kind of complex tasks, those complex repetitive tasks. And one of them, right, was tray assembly. So actually, the first system we introduced here a few years ago is our tray assembly product, and that's really a system that just helps technicians assemble trays, more accurately and more efficiently. And again, and I think it goes against what I think is a common misconception with automation, right? Is that it's just around to replace people, right? And that's not the case at all, right? What we're really, again, first and foremost about is kind of the quality aspect. And then ultimately, what we believe is, look, there's things that people do well and there's things that machines do well. And the way you're going to get the best outcome in an environment is if you let sort of machines focus on the things they do well and let humans focus on the stuff they do well, right? So when it comes to tray assembly, right, humans are humans are very good at right, tasks that require sort of extreme dexterity and intelligence. And so if you think about the whole sort of inspection and testing aspect, right, of tray assembly, that's something that humans are very good at that a machine, to be quite honest, just isn't capable of doing, right? The amount of intelligence and dexterity involved in being able to inspect and test an instrument is far beyond what technology could create today. But machines are pretty good at counting and sorting things and identifying them and doing that sort of stuff. So we say, look, the way you kind of get the optimal outcome here, both quality wise and ultimately hopefully productivity wise, is to allow the system, right, allow the technology to handle the identification and the counting and the sorting, and let the technician really focus on what it is that the humans do well, which is the inspection and the testing, right? And so we've seen that with the tray assembly product, and it's been and it's been great. At the same time, right, it's a one of the biggest challenges is sort of going in and cleaning up that bad process that existed before, right?
Right, because you're not coming into a perfect scenario where
Yeah.
everything is ready, just waiting to be automated.
Right. Yeah. So not only, and you have that on two sides, right? Not only is there huge variety and complexity just within the facility, right? So you're talking over 10,000 different types of surgical instruments, and in a lot of facilities, to be honest, it's the kind of existing data and legacy systems that are challenging, because you may have in one facility an instrument that goes by half a dozen names, right? So cleaning that up in the trays, or what we find a lot of times is that there's been allowed substitutions, right? So sort of there's just these unspoken rules, right, that aren't codified anywhere,
Right.
but technicians know that, hey, if the tray calls for this instrument, it's okay if you put this instrument in, which actually probably isn't okay with the surgeons, but they've complained, they've given up complaining about it.
Yeah, they stopped.
And so one of the conversations we always have to have is what is an acceptable substitution and what isn't, and then cleaning that up in all the trays, right, takes a lot of time. So there's that challenge, but I think one of the biggest things we've seen actually since and I think COVID just really amplified this, is the staffing challenges, right? That a lot of sterile processing departments are dealing with. That
Right.
they don't have enough labor, and if they do, it's not well trained enough.
Hmm.
And so I think that's what's really caused a big uptick in in our business is sterile processing, just the flexibility that our systems sort of allow, right? So utilizing that technology that allows the systems to recognize instruments, well, that really allows you a lot more staffing flexibility, right? Now all of a sudden you can take, I think, previously, let's say you had a tray of 150 instruments, right? It might take a technician that had been on the job for 6 months to a year, right, to have enough knowledge to be able to assemble that 150 instrument tray accurately, right? And even then, there's still probably going to be quality issues just because it's a complex task. But
Right.
let's assume they have the knowledge, right? You need somebody who's been there for a while to be able to do that. Well, utilizing our system, you can take somebody who's, I mean, quite honestly, just never, never even seen a surgical instrument before, and they could use our system to assemble that tray. Is it going to be super productive the first time? No, but they could do it, and
Hmm.
they could learn the instrumentation. Sort of, our systems allow them to learn the instrumentation while they're actually being productive, while at the same time ensuring the quality. And,
Right.
and I think that's something that a lot of facilities have really come to appreciate, given the kind of labor situation that we're in. So
Yeah.
we've got our tray assembly product, and then we've got on the other side another process we looked at is the peel pack process, right? The system, the process that most facilities use to create peel packs, and some of them do really tremendous volumes of these. Which is
Yeah.
again a
That's an
very
understatement, I
oh
think.
yeah, and it's just I mean, some facilities are doing 1,000 peel packs a day, right? And
Yeah.
and they're using this process that probably hasn't changed again in 100 years, and it's a very disjointed, very sort of antiquated process that involves just a ton of steps that are all very disparate. Um, and so we saw with our peel pack system is basically an opportunity to sort of centralize and streamline, right, that whole process. So
Hmm.
so now you just put an instrument down, it recognizes it, it automatically creates the right size pouch for you, it spits out the labels, it just sort of takes all these disparate activities and puts it in one place in one process. And so again, first and foremost, you get the quality, right, you get the consistency. So now, regardless of who's making the peel pack, you get the same peel pack, right, every time, same size, right, correctly labeled. And same thing with the tray, right? Regardless of who's assembling the tray, right? Previously, you'd have 20 technicians making, to be quite honest, or assembling a tray 20 different ways, or making a
Correct.
peel pack 20 different ways, right?
Yep.
Now it's all being done the same way. So you have the consistency, and then that helps you again ultimately achieve the productivity,
Hmm.
which takes a little more time because we've got to kind of clean everything up first. But yeah, so those are really the two areas we're focused on right now is tray assembly and peel packing. We've got another product that helps just sort of the facilities manage their excess instrument inventory. It's not really so much an automator, I'd say, it's just an organizer.
Okay.
But we found, as we were in there working in these departments, we found a lot of facilities just didn't know, what they had in terms of excess instrument inventory or where it was located.
Right.
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 So we have a system called AIM Storage that just sort of helps keep track of that, which really just enables kind of the other two systems to function more efficiently too. But yeah,
I'm
so that's
curious.
kind of where we're at.
I'm curious the connection between education and automation that your team kind of takes.
Yeah.
There's a piece of this where you could develop robots and automation that don't interface at all with any type of education. It's kind of like a product that you put in and just turn on, and then it starts going, and there's not a lot of collaboration around there. But it
Right.
sounds like you've taken a different approach to it, mainly because of uh, that facilitation approach to how you're automating the workflow to not replace the human element, but to supplement or support the human element. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely, and I think that's really a key, and it plays to one of the misconceptions of automation, right? That automation's out there just to eliminate jobs and get rid of people, and that's honestly pretty rarely the case. Usually, it's the automation is there to help the human be better, right? To
Yeah.
to to be more efficient, right? To eliminate sort of waste in the process and to create that consistency, right? And that quality. And actually, there's a great book out there called Reinventing Jobs. It's a four-step approach for applying automation to work. And in there, he talks about how, right, automation doesn't drive, and actually, I think I can quote right from it here, right? Automation drives innovation not by eliminating jobs, but by eliminating functions at which humans are inefficient. Right. So, and again, it just speaks to that, humans aren't so, they're not so, they don't have a great ability to recognize and count and sort things. They make errors, right? A lot of times in that process, but they do have a great ability to inspect and test things. And so we're not trying to dumb down technicians or make them so it's not that, so they don't understand instrumentation. We want to help them learn the instrumentation, and at the same time be kind of serve as a backstop to them, right? So if you do happen to mess up, okay, you've got this backstop, but you should know what every instrument is, and every time you touch an instrument in our system, you're being told what it is, right? And so that reinforcement and that learning, if it's somebody new, right, is really helpful, to them. And we also have a training mode too, right? That just speaks just to education. So you can put our systems in training mode, and then instead of kind of telling the technician what the instrument is, it'll ask them what it is, and it'll present them with four choices, and they
Nice.
just select it, and it kind of keeps score, right? And so what you hope to see is that, and this is a great tool for educators or managers, right? They can then go in and kind of run reports on those, on those tests, and say, and hopefully see that the scores are improving over time, and hence the technicians are sort of learning, right, learning the instrumentation. So we're there to sort of, number one, ensure quality, number two, to educate and train, right, and then I'd say as a third to, to hit on the productivity side eventually.
So, as one of those companies in the space that has been there, like I know automation is not new at all, but in sterile processing, at least recent automation outside of automated washers and automated pass-through sterilizers, like we're aware of, if that's been going on, that's pretty well established. But these kinds of new automating processes in the assembly area, in the storage area, in the decontamination area, like that is fairly new. Are you sensing more momentum now in 2021, 2022 around that pace of innovation uptake in sterile processing? Is it because of the pandemic, or are we still in that kind of challenge phase where we're having to convince the industry that hey, this is necessary?
I think we're still in the challenge phase, and I
Okay.
think that's from a couple, directions. One is, is COVID, while being helpful, I think in driving, or having managers recognize the need that, hey, we need technology here to help us be flexible with our staffing and more efficient with our staffing, because we just can't find the bodies, right? So that I think was a tailwind. At the same time, you have the headwind of COVID, which is shutting down
Hmm.
shutting down surgeries and and
Right.
elective procedures, and disrupting hospital activities and cash flows, and presenting a lot of challenges to facilities there. So we've got these sort of competing headwinds and tailwinds. And I think they shift back and forth depending on whether COVID is surging or not. It seems,
Right.
over the last couple of years, and so I think because of that, I would say we were coming into a momentum phase, but now we're seeing, I think, another resurgence, and
Hmm.
we've talked to some facilities that are, again, are canceling elective surgeries and things, and so it's still, I think the pandemic environment has still created, a lot of challenge for a lot of facilities, and that ripples through the industry, right, to all their suppliers. So coming in, pre-COVID, I would say we were in the momentum phase, and we
Hmm.
were really starting to see a lot of momentum building, and a lot of activity and a lot of recognition. But then we got hit with the pandemic, and everyone sort of had to hit the reset button, I think, in a lot of ways. And so now, now I think we're still kind of struggling through that. But the hope is, and I believe that once we're able to, hopefully one day put this pandemic behind us, we'll start to build that momentum again, and start to see, hopefully a tipping point of some sort, right?
Hmm. As you look out the next 5 to 10 years in the industry, in this conversation, like we just kind of asked, like what's going on right now, but looking out another 5, 10 years, how would you paint the landscape of automation and robotics in this space? Like, are we gonna get to that tipping point and then see that uptick in adoption? And what parts of the department do you foresee folks begin to automate?
Yeah, no, geez, it's a great question. Pretty big one. I mean, I'm right, I'm an optimist by nature, right? I think any
Okay.
entrepreneur, right, right, Hank, has to kind of be a natural optimist. Otherwise, you'd never,
You're not going to last
yeah.
very long.
Otherwise, you'd never do any of these things. So yeah, so I mean, my hope and my belief is that we will in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, see that tipping point, and see, I think, sort of the widespread adoption of technology in the department. Um, what that will ultimately look like, I think is just really a function of sort of how fast that comes, right? And I mean, the rate at which technology is improving, both, what we see in the improvements in cameras and AI, and, I mean, that stuff is evolving really rapidly. So I think we'll continue to see, improvement in the quality of the technology being deployed. How far will it get? I don't know. Again, it all depends on, I think, is that tipping point 2 years out? Is it 5 years out? Is it 10 years out?
Hmm.
I'm not, I don't want to pin myself down to a forecast, because I'll only be right. I had a great economics professor who said, if you're an economist, right, if you give a number, never give a date, and if you give a date, never give a number, and you'll be one of the best economists in the world. He says, when you get into trouble
Eventually
is
you're going to be right.
yeah, when you get into trouble is when you put a date and a number together, and then you're sort of doomed. So I'm gonna continue to follow that advice, and say, it's coming, but I don't know when.
Okay, fantastic. Is there any other challenge, takeaway, advice, as we wrap up here, that you want to throw out for folks who are tuning in to the symposium? Because if you're watching this, you're already interested in robotics and automation in the space, right? So it's kind of like everybody's pre-qualified to be interested in this topic.
Right.
So, like, what is that kind of unique takeaway that you'd say, hey, go think some more about this, or go do some more research about this, or go talk to some other folks in your department about this? Like, what is that one?
Yeah, no, I think, I think I would just say that we can, there's technology out there that can help, right? I mean, if you've got problems with staffing, with getting the right people, or enough, well-trained people, in your department, there's technology out there that can help. If are if your technicians hate doing peel packs, there's technology out there that can help. Is it going to solve all your problems? No. Right. We're not at that phase, but it can definitely help. But it also, right, it also involves, again, it's the process sort of has to be fixed first, right? So and we're, the more of this we do, the better I think we're getting at the change management, and at having these implementations sort of go smoother and take less time. But there is that phase to it. And so, but you don't have to go it alone, right? I mean, we're here, and I think anybody who's in technology, in this space, is, has to be a part of the change side, and they have to, we're here to sort of help you through that and to guide you through it, and we've done it a number of times now, so we sort of know what to expect and what it's going to look like. And we can help, and at the same time, we're trying to, ultimately create more turnkey type of solutions for folks, that, that they can just say, hey, look, here's my problem, and we'll just come in and, try and solve it for them, kind of from front to back, and not have, a lot of this kind of growing pains of automation that, a lot of facilities, I think, experience initially. But if you're struggling with problems, I'd say the takeaway is that there is technology out there that can help. Is it going to solve all your problems? Probably not. But it can make really a meaningful difference in, in both quality and productivity. And it's got to be. I think the other thing is, it's really got to be, paired with the data, right? Because ultimately, it's all kind of in the data, right? And I think that's maybe something that gets missed a lot of points, is it's you need to kind of be ready to commit to reviewing data regularly, and figuring out what your metrics are, and really starting to pay attention to them and monitor them, because that's really where you can really drive the process and drive the change, is through through the data. And that's something we do a lot of, just kind of, whether it's weekly or monthly reviews, as part of kind of our implementations of, look, here's here's where we started, here's where we're at now, here's ultimately where we know we're going to get to.
Right.
Because we've seen it, enough times now. But here's where we're at in sort of this process, right? And we can see it, very clearly in the data. So if you're not a data person, or aren't comfortable looking at charts and graphs and time series type data, then I think that's something that is worth getting involved in and learning about, because I think it's going to start to pervade and drive more and more of this industry in this space. So.
If folks want to get in contact with you and track you down for more conversations, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, sure. No, email, of course, always works. So, email is just B, first letter B as in boy, and last name Kiess, Kiess as in Sam, at rstautomation.com. So that's Robert Sam Thomas, automation.com.
Awesome. I appreciate your time today, Braun, for the insight and perspective that you shared. I think we're in agreement on a lot of the big themes that are driving the
Yeah.
conversation.
No, I think so. And no, thank you to you, Hank, and to Beyond Clean for being a thought leader in this space. So appreciate the time.
Right. Okay, so you've been watching Workers or Widgets, a symposium on sterile processing, robotics, and automation. I'm Hank Balch again from Beyond Clean. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to check out the other sessions of the symposium if you haven't already, and make sure to go take your CE quiz to get credit for all of these interesting topics and conversations in the space. And as we like to say, until next time, keep fighting dirty.
Hank.